The great hall on Kepler Station buzzed with the sounds of 100 different alien languages. Translators worked overtime as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for the most important peace summit in decades. The massive dome above them showed the stars spinning slowly, reminding everyone just how far they had traveled to be here. Jake Martinez sat at the human table and watched the other delegations file in. Each group brought their finest warriors as escorts. The Krex delegation marched in formation, their 8-foot-tall bodies covered in natural armor that could stop laser fire. Their plasma cannons hummed with barely contained energy. Behind them came the Vorthon delegation, floating in their mechanical suits that could tear through ship hulls with ease. The Zephyrian hive guards chittered as they formed protective circles around their queen speakers. Their razor-sharp claws could slice through metal like paper. Even the peaceful-looking Altarians brought their cyber-enhanced soldiers, whose glowing implants showed they were ready for battle at any moment. Jake looked to his left where Lisa Brown sat quietly reading through diplomatic files on her tablet. She wore a simple blue uniform with no decorations or rank insignia. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she looked like any office worker from Earth. To his right stood Carl Johnson, their security officer. Carl wore a basic black suit and carried only a ceremonial sidearm that probably had not been fired in years. That was it. 3 humans in a room full of thousands of aliens and their military escorts. Ambassador Martinez whispered his communication officer through his earpiece. The other delegations are talking about us. They think we are either very brave or very stupid. Jake smiled but kept his voice low. Let them think what they want, Danny. We are here to make peace, not show off. Across the hall, he could see alien delegates pointing at the human table and having hushed conversations. Some looked confused. Others seemed worried. A few appeared to be laughing, though it was hard to tell with some of the species present. The opening ceremony began with the usual speeches about cooperation and understanding. Jake had heard it all before at dozens of summits like this one. The real work would happen in the smaller meeting rooms over the next few days. That was where treaties were born or where wars began. During the first break, Jake was not surprised when War Chief Thraxon of the Krex approached their table. The massive alien had to duck under the human-sized lighting fixtures. His forearms moved in what Jake recognized as a gesture of polite curiosity among the Krex people. Human ambassador. Thraxon's voice came through his translator device, in a deep rumble. I must speak with you about a matter that puzzles my people. Of course, War Chief, please sit if you can manage it. Jake gestured to a reinforced chair that had been brought for larger delegates. Thraxon settled into the chair, which creaked under his weight. Your people have quite a reputation from the Outer Rim conflicts. The way your ships moved in the Battle of Titan Belt was spoke of with great respect among warrior cultures. Your tactics in the Proxima defense were studied by military academies across 6 sectors. Jake nodded. We do what we must to protect ourselves and our allies. Yes, this is understood, but here is what puzzles us. Thraxon leaned forward, his black eyes focusing intently on Jake. Every other species brings their finest warriors to these summits. It shows strength. It shows that their words have the backing of force, but you humans bring only 3 people, and none appear to be soldiers. Lisa looked up from her tablet with a small smile but said nothing. Carl continued to scan the room as if he had not heard the conversation at all. We bring our best diplomats, Jake replied simply. We find they work better without distractions. Thraxon's mandibles clicked in confusion. But surely you understand the importance of showing military strength during negotiations? How can other species take your words seriously if you show no force to back them up? War Chief, may I ask you something? Jake leaned back in his chair and spoke in a casual tone. When you want to negotiate a trade agreement for farming equipment, do you bring your best warriors or your best merchants? Merchants, of course. Warriors know nothing of commerce. Exactly. And when you want to make peace, do you bring those who are trained for war or those who are trained for peace? Thraxon was quiet for a long moment. His translator hummed softly as it processed his thoughts. But the threat of force is what makes others listen to peaceful words. Maybe for some species, Jake said. But we have found that the best way to convince someone to choose peace is to make them genuinely want it. Threats usually just make people angry. The war chief looked around the great hall at all the military displays. Weapons gleamed under the station lights. Armor plates reflected the colors of a dozen different species. The air practically hummed with contained violence. Your approach is unusual, Thraxon admitted. We like to think it is practical, Lisa said without looking up from her work. Her voice was calm and pleasant, like a teacher explaining something to a student. Thraxon turned his attention to her. And you, human Lisa? You are a diplomat as well? I handle various aspects of our negotiations. Yes. She finally looked up and gave him a warm smile. I specialize in conflict resolution. The war chief studied her for a moment, then turned to Carl. And you, human Carl? You are their guard? Carl nodded once but continued watching the room. I make sure everyone gets home safe. Something in Carl's tone made Thraxon pause. The war chief had spent decades around soldiers and warriors. He knew the sound of a man who had seen real combat. But Carl looked so ordinary, so unremarkable, like someone you might pass on the street without a second glance. War chief, Jake said, drawing attention back to himself. I understand your confusion. Your people value strength and honor in battle. These are good qualities. But we have learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to fight. Thraxon stood up slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human table. Perhaps we will understand better as these talks progress. He paused, then added, though I admit your confidence is impressive. Either you are very wise or very foolish. Time will tell, Jake replied with a grin. As Thraxon walked away, Jake could see other alien delegates watching the interaction. Word would spread quickly through the summit. The humans were either playing a very deep game or they were completely unprepared for serious negotiations. Lisa closed her tablet and looked at Jake. Think he bought it? Hook, line, and sinker, Carl said quietly, still watching the room. Though I think he suspects something. Jake nodded. They always do. But suspecting and knowing are two different things. The three humans sat quietly as the break ended and delegates returned to their seats. Around them, hundreds of the galaxy's finest warriors prepared for days of careful negotiation. None of them had any idea what they were really dealing with. 3 days had passed since the peace summit began, and the talks were not going well. The main conference room felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Jake Martinez watched from his seat as voices grew louder and tempers grew shorter. The biggest problem was between two powerful groups. The hegemony of Altair controlled mining operations in 12 star systems. The Crystalline Confederacy wanted access to the rich mineral deposits in the disputed Vega system. Both sides claimed the territory was rightfully theirs. General Vex Korth represented the Altarians. He was a frightening sight even by alien standards. His body was a mix of flesh and machine parts. 4 cybernetic arms jutted from his torso, each one ending in different weapons. His face was covered by a metal mask that glowed red when he was angry. Right now it was glowing very red indeed. The Vega system belongs to the hegemony, he shouted, his voice crackling through electronic voice modulators. We have held it for 300 years. We will not give up what is ours. On the other side of the room, the crystalline delegates hummed with dangerous energy. They looked like living diamonds, their bodies made of some kind of transparent mineral that caught and reflected light. When they were upset, they vibrated at frequencies that could shatter glass. The air around them was starting to shimmer with barely controlled power. The hegemony took those worlds by force, responded Crystal Singer Velneth, her voice like wind chimes in a storm. They drove out peaceful mining colonies and claimed the resources for themselves. This cannot stand. General Vex Korth slammed all 4 of his fists on the conference table. The metal surface dented under the impact. Peaceful colonies? They were stealing from us. We had every right to defend our territory. Behind the general, his soldiers powered up their weapons. Jake counted 12 of them, all enhanced with the Same kind of cybernetic modifications as their leader. Energy weapons hummed to life. Targeting lasers painted red dots across the room. The crystalline delegates responded by vibrating faster. Their guardian constructs began to phase into normal space from wherever they stored them. These creatures looked like living sculptures, made of the same crystal material as their creators, but shaped into forms designed for war. Sharp edges gleamed. Energy crackled between their faceted surfaces. Other delegations started backing away from the confrontation. The Krex warriors reached for their plasma cannons. The Vorthon mechs activated their defensive shields. Even the usually calm Zephyrians were clicking their claws nervously. Jake felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came before violence broke out. He had seen this pattern too many times before. Soon someone would make the first move, and then everyone would be shooting. The Peace Summit would become a battle zone. That was when Lisa Brown stood up. She moved with no hurry at all, like someone getting up to refill their coffee cup. Her simple blue uniform looked completely out of place among all the weapons and armor filling the room. She walked directly between the two hostile forces, stepping over targeting laser beams as if they were puddles of water. "Gentlemen," she said in a quiet voice that somehow carried clearly across the now silent chamber, "perhaps we should discuss this like reasonable people." General Vex Korth turned his glowing mask toward her. For a moment, Jake thought the cybernetic alien might actually attack Lisa right there. Instead, he let out a sound like grinding metal that Jake recognized as laughter. "Little human, do you think your words can stop what is coming?" The general's voice was full of contempt. "My soldiers have conquered 17 star systems. We have crushed armies that were 10 times larger than this entire summit." Lisa nodded thoughtfully, as if she was considering his words carefully. 17 systems, that is quite impressive, General. Tell me, what is your personal combat record?" The question seemed to confuse Vex Korth, but his pride made him answer. "I have killed 43 enemies in personal combat. I have led successful campaigns against 6 different species. I have never been defeated in battle." His chest swelled with pride as he listed his achievements. "Interesting," Lisa said in the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "I once held off an entire Zephyrian assault fleet for 6 hours, using nothing but a damaged frigate and a mining laser. That was before breakfast on a Tuesday." The conference room went completely silent. Not even the quiet hum of life support systems could be heard. Every single eye, optical sensor, and sensory organ in the room focused on the small human woman who had just casually mentioned something that should have been impossible. Jake knew about the Battle of Kepler's Edge, of course. Every human military officer did. It was taught in academies as an example of tactical genius under impossible odds. But the official records had classified most of the details. Only a handful of people knew exactly what had happened that day. General Vex Korth's mask flickered as his electronic systems tried to process what he had just heard. You are lying. No single ship could hold off an assault fleet." Lisa smiled, and Jake noticed that several alien delegates took a step backward. There was something in that smile that made warriors nervous. "General, the Zephyrians use pack tactics. Lots of small, fast ships working together like a swarm of insects. They rely on overwhelming their targets with sheer numbers." Lisa spoke, like a teacher explaining a lesson. "The trick is to make them think they are fighting something much bigger than they actually are." Crystal singer Vel Neth's harmonic voice interrupted. "The Battle of Kepler's Edge. We have heard whispers of this engagement, but the reports said it was a full battle group that drove off the Zephyrian fleet." "Reports often say many things," Lisa replied. "The important thing is that nobody had to die that day. The Zephyrians went home. The colony was saved. Everyone was happy." War Chief Thraxon had been listening from across the room. Now he approached, his massive frame moving carefully. "Human Lisa, if what you say is true, then you are a warrior of great skill." "I am a diplomat," Lisa corrected gently. "I just happen to be good at solving problems." She turned back to General Vex Korth and Crystal Singer Vel Neth. "Now, about this mining dispute. General, Your people need the resources from Vega to maintain your technology. Singer Velneth, your people, need raw materials to grow new crystal matrices. Instead of fighting over one system, why not work together to develop mining operations in the unexplored regions beyond Vega? There are dozens of systems out there with even richer deposits. The two leaders looked at each other, then back at Lisa. The small human woman stood between armies that could have leveled cities, and she was talking about cooperative mining ventures as if violence had never been an option. You make it sound simple, Vexkorth said, though his mask had stopped glowing quite so brightly. Most problems are simpler than they appear, Lisa replied. People just get so focused on what they cannot have that they forget about what they could have instead. Jake watched as the tension in the room slowly began to fade. Weapons powered down. The crystal constructs faded back into storage dimensions. Delegates who had been preparing for battle started to relax. Lisa Brown, career, diplomat and conflict resolution specialist, had just prevented a war by having a casual conversation. She made it look as easy as ordering lunch. But Jake noticed something else. The other delegations were staring at Lisa with new expressions. Word would spread quickly through the station. If this was what Earth sent as a junior diplomat, what kind of people were the humans really? The question was starting to make a lot of alien military leaders very uncomfortable. Word about Lisa Brown's casual mention of the Battle of Kepler's Edge spread through Kepler Station like wildfire. By evening, every major delegation had heard some version of the story. The small human woman who looked like a secretary had apparently held off an entire assault fleet by herself. Some aliens believed it. Others thought it was impossible. All of them were curious. The Vorthan delegation was known for being thorough in their research. They had the best intelligence networks in the galaxy and databases that could cross-reference information from thousands of sources. Admiral Syntax, their lead negotiator, spent most of the night running searches on the human delegation. What he found made his optical processors work overtime. The next evening, there was a private dinner for the senior delegates. It was meant to be a relaxed social event where people could talk without the formal structure of the negotiation sessions. Jake Martinez mingled with various alien dignitaries, discussing everything from trade routes to cultural exchange programs. Carl Johnson stood quietly near the wall, watching the room with the same calm attention he had shown all week. He wore his simple black suit and looked like any security guard at any corporate event. His job was to make sure nothing happened to the ambassador. Most people ignored him completely. Admiral Syntax did not ignore him. The Vorthon floated over to where Carl was standing, his mechanical body humming softly with electronic systems. His sensors swept over Carl continuously, gathering data and running analysis programs. To most observers, it looked like casual conversation between a delegate and a security officer. Human Johnson, Admiral Syntax said, his voice like a musical instrument being played by a computer. My analysis indicates you are merely a guard, yet there are inconsistencies in the available data about your service record. Carl did not turn from his careful observation of the room. His eyes continued to track the movements of delegates, security personnel, and serving staff. I am just here to make sure the ambassador gets back to Earth safely, Admiral. Indeed. This is what the official records state. Admiral Syntax moved closer, his sensors focusing more intently on Carl. However, my sources have uncovered references to someone matching your description in several incident reports from the Perseus sector. The survivors of certain events have mentioned a figure they call the Ghost of Perseus. Carl finally turned to look at the Admiral. His expression remained perfectly calm, like someone discussing the weather. Pirates tell a lot of stories, Admiral. Most of them are not true. Perhaps, but the stories are remarkably consistent. Admiral Syntax accessed his data files and began reciting information. 3 years ago, a pirate base in the Perseus sector was completely destroyed. This base had been terrorizing shipping lanes for months. It was protected by stolen military cruisers and had never been successfully attacked. Then one day it simply vanished. Carl listened politely but said nothing. The few survivors spoke of a single ship that appeared from nowhere. They described impossible maneuvers, weapons fire that seemed to come from empty space, and a pilot who fought like he could see the future. Admiral Syntax paused, his sensors clicking as they focused on Carl's face. They said it was like fighting a ghost. That does sound like an interesting story, Carl replied. He turned back to watching the room, but Admiral Syntax noticed that his scanning pattern had become more focused. Carl was now tracking 17 different potential threats that the Admiral had not even noticed. Human Johnson, my curiosity circuits are quite active. If you were involved in this Perseus incident, how many pirate ships did you destroy? Carl was quiet for a long moment. Across the room, Jake Martinez was laughing at something the Krex war chief had said. Lisa Brown was explaining human agricultural techniques to a group of fascinated plant-based aliens. Everything looked perfectly normal and peaceful. All of them, Carl said finally, his voice no louder than before. Admiral Syntax's optical sensors whirred as they refocused. All of them? The intelligence reports mentioned 12 cruisers, 47 smaller attack craft, and a space station armed with military-grade weapons. It was a good day, Carl replied with a slight smile. I had just finished my morning coffee. The Admiral's processing units worked frantically to analyze this information. Either Carl was lying, or he was admitting to single-handedly destroying an entire pirate fleet. The mathematical probabilities seemed impossible, but the Admiral's sensors detected no signs of deception. How? Admiral Syntax asked. Carl turned to look at him again. This time the Admiral noticed something different in the human's eyes. They were still calm and friendly, but there was something else there. Something that made the Admiral's threat assessment program start sending warning signals. Admiral, have you ever played chess? Carl asked. I am familiar with the human strategic game, yes. The key to chess is not to make the best move. The key is to make sure your opponent cannot make any good moves. Carl's smile grew a little wider. Pirates are not very good at chess. Admiral. Syntax processed this statement and felt his security protocols activate. Are you suggesting that you manipulated an entire pirate fleet into a position where they could not fight effectively? I am suggesting that pirates are predictable. They see an easy target, they attack. They see a bigger threat, they run. They see an impossible situation, they panic. Carl shrugged casually. I just gave them the right things to see at the right times. The Admiral's sensors swept the room again, but this time he was looking for things he might have missed. Carl's positioning suddenly made sense. From where he stood, he could see every entrance, every potential weapon, every person who might pose a threat to the human delegation. He had been doing this all week, and the Admiral had not even noticed. You have been analyzing this entire station since you arrived, Admiral Syntax realized. It is my job, Carl replied simply. How many potential threats have you identified? Carl was quiet for a moment, his eyes still moving around the room. Right now, 43 immediate concerns, 12 possible problems, and 6 situations that could get interesting if the wrong person makes the wrong decision. Admiral Syntax ran his own threat assessment and could identify maybe half that many potential issues. How do you see so much? Practice, Carl said. Also, most people do not pay attention to their security guards. The Admiral realized that Carl had been gathering intelligence on every delegation, every weapon system, every security protocol, and every possible threat at the summit. He had done it so quietly and naturally that nobody had noticed. The humans had walked into one of the most heavily defended locations in the galaxy, and their security guard had mapped out every weakness within hours. Human Johnson, may I ask what your actual military rank was before you became a security consultant? Carl smiled and turned back to watching the room. I was never really good with ranks, Admiral. Too much paperwork. As the evening progressed, Admiral Syntax found himself studying the human delegation with new interest. Lisa Brown, the junior diplomat, had fought off an assault fleet. Carl Johnson, the security guard, had destroyed an entire pirate operation and was currently running a one-man intelligence operation on the entire peace summit. If these were the humans' support staff, what kind of person was their actual ambassador? The Admiral had a feeling he was about to find out. Across the room, Jake Martinez finished his conversation with the Krex delegation and began moving toward a group of Altarian military officers. They had been drinking heavily and were starting to make loud comments about human weakness and cowardice. Carl noticed the movement and shifted his position slightly. Admiral Syntax realized that the security guard was now positioned to intervene if the situation escalated. "Human Johnson," the Admiral said quietly, "I believe your ambassador may be walking into a difficult situation." Carl nodded. "He usually does. Are you concerned?" Carl's smile became almost invisible, but Admiral Syntax caught it with his sensors. "Admiral, I am never concerned when Ambassador Martinez handles difficult situations. I just feel sorry for whoever is about to make him stop being polite." The fourth day of the summit started badly and got worse. General Vex Korth had been drinking something that made his cybernetic systems glow brighter than usual. His enhanced soldiers stood behind him in the main assembly hall, their weapons powered up and ready. The general was angry about the mining rights discussion from the day before, and he wanted everyone to know it. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his electronic voice crackling through the hall's speakers. "We sit here talking while humans make fools of us all. They bring no army, no weapons, no strength to back up their words." Other delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The morning session had been going well until General Vex Korth started drinking and complaining. Now the peaceful atmosphere was turning dangerous again. Jake Martinez sat calmly at the human table, listening to the general's rant. Lisa Brown continued reading through trade agreements as if nothing was happening. Carl Johnson stood by the wall, watching everything with his usual quiet attention. "The humans think they are clever," General Vex Korth continued, pacing back and forth in front of his soldiers. "They send a secretary who tells stories about impossible battles. They bring a guard who claims to be some kind of ghost warrior. And their ambassador sits there smiling like he knows something we do not." War Chief Thraxon tried to calm the situation. "General, perhaps we should return to the scheduled discussions about territorial boundaries." "No." Vex Korth slammed his fists on a nearby table, leaving dents in the metal. "I am tired of human tricks and human lies. If they think they are so superior, let their leader prove it." The general turned to face Jake directly. His red mask glowed like an angry star. "Ambassador Martinez, I issue a formal combat challenge. If humans are truly as strong as they pretend to be, face me in honorable combat." The hall went completely silent. A formal combat challenge was serious business in galactic politics. It could not be ignored or dismissed. Jake would have to accept the challenge, find a champion to fight for him, or forfeit on behalf of all humanity. "If I win," General Vex Korth declared, "humanity withdraws from all disputed territories and admits they are too weak to deserve a place in galactic affairs." Several alien delegates started talking at once. Some tried to offer mediation services. Others suggested alternative ways to settle the dispute. The Crystalline Confederacy offered to provide neutral judges for a formal duel. Jake Martinez stood up slowly. He looked around the hall at all the assembled species and their military escorts. His expression was calm, but those who knew him well could see he was thinking carefully about something. "General, I appreciate the offer," Jake said in a conversational tone. "But I am here to negotiate peace, not fight wars." "Then you forfeit." General Vex Korth's voice echoed through the hall. "Humanity shows its true cowardice. You have no strength to back up your pretty words." Jake sighed and looked over at Lisa, who gave him a small nod. He turned to Carl, who simply shrugged as if to say it was Jake's decision. Then Jake looked back at General Vex Korth and all his enhanced soldiers. "You know, General, I really hoped we could avoid this." Jake began removing his diplomat's jacket. He handed it carefully to Lisa, then loosened his tie. "Tell me, is 30 seconds enough time for you?" General Vex Korth's mandibles clicked in confusion. 30 seconds for what? For this to be over. What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for decades to come. Jake Martinez moved like water flowing downhill, smooth and unstoppable. He seemed to barely exert any effort as he stepped toward the general and his 12 enhanced soldiers. The first soldier to attack had cybernetic legs that could kick through armor plating. Jake caught the kick, used the soldier's own momentum to spin him around and sent him crashing into two of his companions. All three went down in a tangle of metal and electronics. The second soldier fired an energy weapon that could melt through starship hulls. Jake was not there when the beam arrived. He appeared beside the soldier, took the weapon away so gently it looked like the soldier had simply handed it over, then used it to disable the power systems of 4 more soldiers before they could react. General Vex Korth charged forward with all 4 of his cybernetic arms swinging. Each arm ended in a different weapon: plasma cutter, impact hammer, neural disruptor, and razor field generator. Jake ducked under the first swing, stepped inside the second, caught the third arm, and used it to block the fourth, then somehow managed to tie all 4 arms into a knot that left the general unable to move. The remaining soldiers tried to surround Jake, but he flowed between them like smoke. He used their own weapons against them, turned their cybernetic enhancements into weaknesses, and demonstrated combat techniques that made no sense according to any military doctrine the assembled delegates had ever seen. One soldier with enhanced reflexes that could track hypersonic projectiles found himself moving in slow motion, while Jake seemed to speed up. Another soldier with armor that could withstand nuclear explosions discovered that Jake did not need to break the armor when he could simply turn off the power systems that ran it. The most impressive moment came when 3 soldiers attacked at once from different angles. Jake grabbed a metal chair, spun it around his body like a shield, and somehow managed to use it to redirect all 3 attacks so that the soldiers ended up stunning each other with their own weapons. When the dust settled 27 seconds later, Jake Martinez was straightening his tie. General Vex Korth and all 12 of his enhanced soldiers were unconscious on the floor. Their weapons were scattered around the room, most of them disabled or dismantled. Not one of them had managed to land a single hit on the human ambassador. Jake looked around the silent hall and smiled pleasantly. Anyone else want to discuss mining rights? The alien delegate stared at him in complete shock. This was not a warrior who had spent years training for combat. This was a diplomat who had just dismantled an entire enhanced military unit while barely wrinkling his shirt. He had moved like fighting was as natural as breathing, like violence was just another form of conversation that he happened to speak fluently. War Chief Thraxon was the first to find his voice. Ambassador Martinez, that was impressive. Thank you, War Chief, though I do hope we can get back to more peaceful discussions now. Jake put his jacket back on and returned to his seat. General Vex Korth should be fine when he wakes up. His cybernetics will need some recalibration, but there is no permanent damage. Lisa handed him a glass of water without looking up from her paperwork. Carl had not moved from his position by the wall, though several delegates noticed he was now smiling slightly. Admiral Syntax floated over to examine the unconscious soldiers. His sensors swept over them repeatedly, trying to understand what had happened. Ambassador, the precision required to disable their systems without causing permanent harm, the tactical awareness needed to counter 12 different fighting styles simultaneously. How is this possible? Jake took a sip of water and considered the question. Admiral, you have to understand something about humans. We have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We have tried every possible way to hurt, kill, and destroy one another. We got very good at it. He gestured toward the unconscious soldiers. But we also learned that the best fighters are not the ones who can cause the most damage. The best fighters are the ones who can end fights quickly with the least harm to everyone involved. Crystal singer Velneth's harmonic voice filled the hall. Ambassador Martinez, you fight like someone who has seen much combat. Yet you are a diplomat. I am a diplomat because I have seen much combat, Jake replied. War is terrible, Singer Velneth. It destroys everything it touches. The best way to prevent war is to make sure everyone understands that fighting is not a good option for anyone. The delegates looked around at each other, then back at the 3 humans. Lisa Brown, who had held off an assault fleet. Carl Johnson, who had destroyed an entire pirate operation. And Jake Martinez, who had just demonstrated that he could take apart an enhanced military unit with his bare hands. If these were the people Earth sent when they wanted to make peace, what were their Actual soldiers like? Nobody really wanted to know the answer to that question. The news of Ambassador Martinez's demonstration spread through Kepler Station within hours. Every species had heard some version of what happened in the main assembly hall. The human diplomat had taken apart an entire enhanced military unit in less than 30 seconds. He had done it so efficiently that none of the soldiers were seriously injured, just unconscious and confused. General Vex Korth woke up 6 hours later in the medical bay. His cybernetic systems were functional but needed recalibration. He refused to talk about what had happened, but the security recordings spoke for themselves. Every delegation had copies within the day. The final session of the Peace Summit was scheduled for the next morning. Jake Martinez arrived early and found the main hall already full of delegates. Every species was represented, and all of them were staring at the human table with new expressions. Some looked curious. Others seemed worried. A few appeared genuinely frightened. Jake took his seat between Lisa Brown and Carl Johnson, just as he had every day of the summit. The three humans looked exactly the same as they had when they first arrived. Simple clothes, no weapons, no military escorts. But now everyone in the hall knew what that really meant. War Chief Thraxon was the first to approach their table. The massive Krex warrior moved carefully, as if he was approaching something dangerous. His forearms gestured in what Jake recognized as a formal request for conversation. "Ambassador Martinez," Thraxon said, his translator crackling with nervous energy. "I must speak with you about something that has been troubling my people." "Of course, War Chief. Please sit." Jake gestured to the reinforced chair that had been brought for larger delegates. Thraxon settled into the chair but did not relax. "Yesterday you showed combat skills that would make you a legend among warrior cultures. Your companions have also demonstrated abilities that seem impossible. This raises a question that my people must have answered." Jake waited patiently for the question. "Why do you humans never bring your armies to these summits? Surely you could intimidate any opposition into accepting your terms. You could demand whatever you wanted and no one could refuse." Other delegates had been listening to the conversation. Now they moved closer, forming a circle around the human table. Representatives from dozens of species wanted to hear the answer to this question. Jake looked around at all the alien faces staring at him. Some were reptilian, others crystalline. A few were mechanical constructs speaking for distant masters. All of them were waiting to hear why Earth approached galactic politics so differently from everyone else. "War Chief Thraxon, let me ask you something," Jake said in a calm voice. "When you want to negotiate a delicate trade agreement, do you send your most aggressive warriors? Of course not. We send our most skilled diplomats and negotiators." "Exactly." Jake spread his hands on the table. "The three of us? We are your diplomats." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the quiet hum of the station's life support systems seemed to stop. Every delegate in the hall was processing what Jake had just said. Admiral Syntax was the first to understand. His optical sensors focused sharply on Jake as his analysis programs worked frantically. "Ambassador, are you saying that you three are not military personnel?" "Carl is a security consultant," Jake replied matter-of-factly. "Lisa specializes in conflict resolution and trade negotiations. I handle diplomatic relations and treaty discussions. We are all career diplomats. But the combat abilities..." Crystal singer Velneth's harmonic voice was barely above a whisper. "Are part of our diplomatic training," Lisa said, looking up from her tablet for the first time all morning. "We find that negotiations go more smoothly when everyone understands that violence is not really an option." War Chief Thraxon's mandibles clicked rapidly as he tried to process this information. "You are telling us that Earth's diplomatic corps is trained in advanced combat techniques?" "Among other things," Carl said from his position by the wall. "Languages, cultural studies, economics, military tactics, psychology, engineering, emergency, medicine, and conflict resolution. We like to be prepared for any situation that might come up during negotiations." The implications of this revelation hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. The three humans sitting at the diplomats' table were not warriors pretending to be diplomats. They were actual diplomats who happened to be trained to a level that would make them elite soldiers in any other military. A small delegate from the Ferengi Commercial Alliance raised a trembling hand. If these are your diplomats, what are your actual soldiers like? Jake, Lisa, and Carl exchanged a look. All three smiled in a way that made every military mind in the chamber suddenly very grateful for the existence of peace summits. Well, Jake said quietly, let us just say there is a reason we prefer diplomacy. The delegates sat in stunned silence as the full truth finally became clear. Earth did not bring armies to peace summits because they did not need to. When humanity wanted to negotiate, they sent people who could end wars with words but who could also end them in other ways if necessary. The threat was not implied or hidden. It was sitting right there at the negotiation table, wearing diplomatic uniforms and speaking in calm, reasonable voices. Admiral Syntax's processors worked overtime as he analyzed this new information. This explains many things about human behavior in past conflicts. You do not make threats because you do not need to. Anyone who chooses to fight you will quickly discover what they are really fighting against. We prefer to think of it as giving people the opportunity to make good decisions, Lisa said. Most intelligent species will choose peace when they understand all their options clearly. War Chief Thraxon leaned back in his chair, his massive frame seeming smaller somehow. Your approach is not just unusual. It is brilliant. You show strength through restraint. You demonstrate power by choosing not to use it. It works most of the time, Jake admitted. Though occasionally we run into someone like General Vex Korth who needs a more direct demonstration. What happens if someone refuses to negotiate peacefully even after seeing what you can do? Asked a delegate from the Outer Rim territories. Carl's smile became almost invisible, but several delegates caught it. That has not happened yet. And if it does happen, the delegate pressed. Jake stood up and began gathering his papers. The summit was ending, and it was time to return to their ships. If someone really insists on fighting humanity despite everything they have learned about us, then they will get to meet the people we send when we are not interested in talking. He paused and looked around the hall one more time. But I think most species are smart enough to avoid that situation. As the three humans walked toward the exit, the alien delegates watched them go in complete silence. They had spent a week learning about Earth's approach to galactic politics. It was elegant, practical, and absolutely terrifying in its effectiveness. Earth sent their diplomats to peace summits because their diplomats were more dangerous than most species' armies. The humans had solved the age-old problem of negotiating from a position of strength without appearing threatening. They simply made sure that anyone who chose violence would have to do so with full knowledge of what they were really choosing to fight. As Jake Martinez, Lisa Brown, and Carl Johnson disappeared down the corridor toward their ship, one thought echoed through the minds of every military leader in the hall. If these were the people Earth sent when they wanted to talk, what kind of monsters did they send when talking was no longer an option? None of them really wanted to find out. The peace summit ended with more successful treaties than any similar gathering in galactic history. Somehow, everyone found it much easier to compromise when they truly understood what the alternative might be.